Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to CIMB live webinar session today. I'm Eileen, an Executive Counselor from UKC Careers Office, and I'll be your MC for today. We are delighted to have representatives from CIMB joining us to speak on the topic Post-Adversity, Business Strategy Reframed, and Transformation Realized. I'm sure all of you have many questions to ask, and do let us know in the chat box, and our moderator will address them soon. Now, I would like to pass the floor to Chi-En, our moderator.
Hi, pleasant morning to everyone tuning in from UK and Ireland, and a very good evening to everyone currently in Malaysia. My name is Chi-En, Head of Strategies for this year's Corporate Luncheon and Career Fair, and an Executive Counselor in the UK Careers Office, and I will be moderating today's Q&A session.
Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Gurdeep Singh Sidhu, Group Chief People Officer and Group Chief Sustainability Officer for today. The floor is yours, Mr. Gurdeep.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for this session with me and the team from CIMB. So yeah, what I thought would be useful for all of you as you would be at different stages of your undergraduate or graduate studies and potentially thinking about what's next for you. So what I thought might be useful is to share a little bit about my perspective of where things are on a macro angle, where things are from a banking perspective, share a little bit about what we look for in our people, and also, share a little bit about my own experience before taking any questions from all of you. Next page, please. Okay, so let me just go straight into the next part. Next page. Next page. Okay, so we often reflect on the macro environment that we all operate in, and so I always like to start when we have these sort of sessions, and internally especially, to sort of just set the context about the external environment that we operate in. So we are today firmly in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. A lot has sort of evolved in the hundreds of years prior to this, but it's safe to say the pace of change, the pace of disruption, and also the pace of innovation is certainly much higher and faster today. We are seeing, in much shorter periods, the reshaping of industries, blurring of sector boundaries, and I'm sure many of you are at your age and being in the UK, being around the world, you will be seeing this, a lot probably closer at the front as opposed to maybe someone like me. But it's safe to say that that is the backdrop that we are all living in. Next page. And so, with that sort of macro fourth industrial revolution backdrop, what does it mean to financial services and banking? I'm sure many of you or some of you would have, spent some time maybe in internships in banks, or you would be, talking to banks about potential careers. And also, of course, you are a consumer of banking, right? And so you understand some of these things, but, the way sort of we look at it, the disruption and the evolution driven by the fourth industrial revolution is leading to some of these traits in banking, right? The disintermediation, the unbundling, invisibility, and commoditization. Let me just share a little bit about maybe one or two of this. Disintermediation and unbundling is really a case of, we came from a period where banks were seen as the only and, of course, dominant source of provision of financial products and services to people and to companies. but it's safe to say in the last 10 years in particular, but even dating prior to that, we are seeing, the unbundling of that, the disintermediation of banks, and that role being taken by other players, non-banks, fintechs, etc. Invisibility and commoditization is also sort of linked to that disruption, in the sense that, today, for example, in China, you could be taking a bank loan from the WeChat platform, and you don't really care or know who the bank behind it is, right? Who is providing the services, etc. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you can go on to the next page. So on page 6, then, if we then think, these are obviously the buzzwords and the words that are often used when you talk about disruption in financial services. Again, in a very short period, even these areas are getting disrupted, right? So when we had peer-to-peer lending, which was a big thing maybe 5 to 7 years ago, in recent times, even peer-to-peer lending has got disrupted, right? Because there are other forms of more innovative financial services, etc., etc. So, banking compared to what it was 20 years ago is clearly quite a different landscape today. And I feel, more and more will change in the space. Next page. And of course, in the last two and a half years, with the onslaught of the pandemic, clearly things have got, if you like, accelerated in some regard, right? The macro outlook has gone from, many, if you like, negative cycles, from obviously economic activity being significantly slowed down, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, to one where, now we are seeing supply chain disruptions led by initially the pandemic, and now unfortunately the war. And all of this is creating a lot of pressures in the sort of macro outlook or macro environment. In terms of, to my point earlier about the disruption created by various players, you can see that the big tech players are essentially leading the way in giving banks a run for their money in terms of disrupting, winning market share. And then on the third sort of, the bottom right of this slide, we also talk about, societal consideration and the regulatory landscape evolving. And all of that is putting different sort of, needs and pressures on the banking sector. Next page. So how is CIMB responding, right? So this is, what we use internally as our summary of our strategy. This is our Forward 23 Plus strategy. The vision is to be the leading focused ASEAN bank, and I'll share a little bit about what we mean by some of the words like focus. But essentially, the strategic themes in the bank is first delivering sustainable financial returns, and that is going to be or that is being driven by a reshaping of our portfolio, and enhanced focus on efficiency, making the right investments in digitization, as well as targeting areas that we want to specifically grow, and that includes the wealth management segment, Islamic finance, as well as the overall digital space. The second theme is around execution and executing well, because that is fundamentally important to drive the right sort of return. Putting a lot of focus on customer centricity, which is a given in this day and age, as well as ensuring that our fundamentals remain very strong. Finally, to also we have also amplified the purpose-driven nature of our strategy, and this includes having the right values, investing in people, and also driving the sustainability agenda. Next page. So what does the vision to be the leading focus ASEAN bank really mean? So here, what we are basically saying, we are today present in across ASEAN. Of course, we also have small presence beyond ASEAN, but essentially Southeast Asia is our home market, with Malaysia being the largest contributor today. And so in Malaysia, we play the full suite of banking. In Indonesia, we are also a universal bank in that sense that we play the whole suite, but we have a little bit more sharper focus on the consumer and SME, as well as the high quality wholesale. In Singapore and Thailand, we try and be a little bit more focused in the sense that we are not a large bank. And so here we remain a bit more focused. And then in Cambodia, we are whilst we are relatively small in the context of the group, but within the market in Cambodia, we are quite a big player already. And so that is something that we play across the universal banking spectrum. How do we intend to win, lead the market on customer experience? As I mentioned earlier, stay competitive in providing value to our customers, leverage our ASEAN footprint for our strength and as a differentiator, and then invest appropriately in technology, digital and analytics to lead on service experience and value, and then really doing the basics well. So, long and short, we are a local ASEAN bank. This identity resonates well with our stakeholders. Next page. I mentioned earlier, one of the things that has certainly evolved, and in terms of the title of our topic, we also talk about how purpose is being reframed, right? In the sense that large organizations and banks in particular are being increasingly expected to play a much more, if you like, supportive and catalytic role in driving the right behaviors and influencing the sustainability agenda. So sustainability, or some of you may have come across ESG, the environmental, social, and governance side or lens of things, is increasingly a big focus for us, as well as many other industry players. We believe that it is simply the right thing to do. It protects enterprise value in the sense that as we see climate change, climate transition will disrupt businesses. And we as a bank who lend money to companies, we have to protect ourselves as well, right? So if a company is going to be disrupted because of climate change, then we need to understand that disruption that may happen. We need to work with the clients to help them manage that better, because if not, then we, of course, they may go into trouble, and then we as a result will also face repercussions. And in terms of influence, financing, as you can imagine, most companies, if not all companies around the world, essentially have some form of financing, right? They work with banks, they work with the capital markets to leverage financing or borrow money, or raise bonds. And so we as financial intermediaries can play an important role in steering our companies and also individuals to do the right thing. Okay, next page. So with that as the sort of background of why sustainability is a big thing, this is essentially CIMB's focus. So we have three broad pillars on climate change vis-a-vis ourselves. We have committed to achieving net zero measured by scope 1 and 2 by 2030, and also net zero holistically by 2050. That's in line with many of the sort of broad country commitments around the world today. In terms of the responsible banking pillar, we seek to do two things: minimize harm, as well as maximize positive impact, right? So minimize harm here is, using our lending and our banking decisions to reduce areas that have negative implication from a sustainability perspective. Maximizing positive impact is, mobilizing green finance and the like to essentially support clients and support businesses that are investing in the right areas. And then finally, on the social impact, here we drive it from two angles. So one is what we call CSR, or the contribution to NGOs and the likes, so that we have 150 million commitment over 5 years. And then additionally, we have committed to all employees, or collectively the employees, undertaking volunteerism as part of this agenda and committing to 100,000 annually for this. Next page. So with, I talked about the economy, I talked about banking, I talked about, sustainability, influencing that. we as people managers, if you like, and that's my role in driving the people agenda in CIMB and in HR, we are likewise, also facing changes and seeing changes as a result of the various displacements and trends and if you like, innovation, right? So what are some of these? There's a need for new leadership capabilities. Clearly, given the pace of change, it's safe to say that the leaders in the industry, whether it's leaders at the top or leaders at different levels of the organization, need to also embrace and be more familiar with the change and everything that is required to be successful today. The role of technology in HR or in the workforce is clearly there, enhancing the employee experience. So a lot has been talked about employer experience, but as all of us are customers as well, and so a lot has been said about customer experience. And so one area that we've started to see a lot of focus on now is enhancing employee experience, which is essentially your day-to-day interaction with your employer and how your own expectations is getting met or not. Learning is a big agenda, right? In most cases, you join a company with a view that you are going to enrich your knowledge, your skills. So developing a personalized learning culture is important. And then, number 5 goes hand in hand with number 2, which is increasingly, the role of data, the role of analytics, the role of metrics in sort of ensuring that, we are indeed making the progress and the positive improvements that we want. And then finally, of course, with the societal push on sustainability within the world of HR, diversity and inclusion is a big agenda, and that's something that we are picking up strongly in CIMB as well. Next page. So as part of the environment that we create internally, and also to give all of you a bit of a flavor of what we push or stand for, this is our values that essentially drives our culture internally. This is what we stand for and we believe in. EPIC, which is enabling talent. So a lot of investment and time going into ensuring that we are putting a lot back into building people, embracing the diversity, as well as creating a work environment that is positive, that celebrates success, that has empathy when faced with adversity, etc. Passion. One of the things that CIMB does have, and something that we've always had for a long time, is a sense of energy and push and drive, and so that's something we want to maintain. So passion is important. Not settling, always go the extra mile, strive our best at what matters most, and always seek to improve. The third, integrity and accountability. When you work in banking or you work in financial services, more so, but of course this is important in every industry that you might end up working in. Integrity is very important. So, we act in an ethical and trustworthy manner. We take ownership of all our actions. So it's all about doing the right thing, think like owners. And so, when we spot something not working right, escalate it, bring it up, and fix it. The fourth value is collaboration. Here, in a big organization, CIMB today is 33,000 people with about 15,000 in Malaysia. So clearly, we have various different divisions, departments, teams. So, the need to collaborate better is a continuous journey. So we really want to push that as part of our culture, which is really about team success over individual success, and really willing to do, to go beyond your job to ensure collective success, work together and back each other up, etc. And then finally is customer centricity. So as I mentioned earlier, this is really at the center of everything, right? Because, as a service provider, our millions of customers. So for example, in Malaysia, we have 7 to 8 million customers. They are obviously very important because they are the ones who essentially pay our salaries. So, doing the right thing for the customer, being obsessed over solving customer problems and exceeding their expectation, engaging and listening to customers to really understand their needs, and importantly, treat customers fairly, meaning, don't push products, don't sell things that may not necessarily be the most optimal thing for the client at that point in time. Next. So with that sort of backdrop of our strategy, some of the things that's going on in CIMB, now let's talk about what is probably more closer to what all of you here are contemplating and thinking about, right? So given everything that I've shared, what do we look for in our talent today, right? And many of these are things that the EPIC values would have touched on, but we've expanded a little bit. So for example, if you start with the first one, ability to learn, I think that's very important. Being agile and being conscious that we need to learn, relearn, adapt, and so that's very important. Having a sort of curious mind, being innovative, very important traits. Having an honest and the integrity point that I mentioned earlier, collaborative, I mentioned earlier, problem solver, digitally savvy, and culturally savvy are all some of the key traits that essentially we look out for when we bring people into the CIMB family. Next page. So over the last 2-3 days, you might have attended some of our sessions. You would have understood what are some of the things that we have on offer. So this page kind of summarizes some of those paths you can take into CIMB, right? So some of you would have heard and may have even may even be our current CIMB ASEAN scholars. So that's certainly a part that you come in pre-university. Then some, come in as interns, and we are going to continue to develop this track. And that could be your first time, you kind of feel the CIMB world, and that gives you a bit of an interesting prelude on whether that is a place for you in the long run. And then if you look at, where you are now, or many of you are, where you are, in the next either months or years, going to complete your studies, then the natural starting point for many could be our complete banker program, which is essentially our management training program that goes on for close to 2 years. You get rotated into different areas, and then you get mapped to an area of your interest, and that then becomes a starting point of your career. There's also specialized areas like relationship management, which is really the frontline sales in consumer business, for example. And so that also is an area that we are actively recruiting for. Next page. So this is the TCB program. And as mentioned, we have some variations in it. So we've got what we call the core sort of complete banker program. This is broad-based agility within banking, cutting across all the main segments of banking. We have the fusion program, where it is agility beyond banking, meaning you work in CIMB for a while, you rotate, but at the same time, you also have the chance to go to other companies that we are partners with in the accounting world, in the law, in the legal field, as well as consulting, for example. And then TCB Digital is a bit more of a focused path in the technology and digital space. And so that's interesting for, for some of you. And then, as I mentioned, the Junior Relationship Manager program. This is really a big push in the area of wealth management and affluent banking. And of course, many of these roles, all these roles come with, the right job rotations, the technical coaching and training, peer-to-peer learning, as well as career guidance and coaching that will be provided to all of you. Next page. In addition to, our core sort of disciplines, our core programs at the entry level, these are some other roles that we continue to see high demand in. And so, beyond the entry level, we have people who are more experienced. For example, maybe some of you are master students or folks that are currently interested in exploring careers in banking. So these are some areas, the risk finance analyst, for example, there's a lot of demand for that. Data scientists, definitely AML or compliance officers, HR analysts, and of course sales positions. As I mentioned, certainly a big growth and demand area. Next page. Our sourcing channels and partners. So of course we are working with the organizers today, UKEC, Graduan. We work with many different organizations to essentially tap into their student base or their sort of member base, if you like. And so that is something that we continue to do. Next page. Of course, we take pride in the recognition that we've got over the years. So this is just a few recent ones. So for example, in Malaysia, we won the Gold Award for the Best Graduate Training Program. So that's something that we're very pleased with for our TCB program. We also got recognized for our onboarding experience, as well as areas like diversity that you see here. Next page. And then, of course, also the Graduan Awards, overall top 3, first runner-up on banking, and then the GCN one, as well as top 20 leading graduate employers in the M100. So this again, thanks to many of you who have supported us, and also this is testament that we continue to focus on providing good career opportunities for people coming back and joining the workforce. Next. So what I thought before we open up for Q&A, maybe to just share a little bit about myself, a little bit about who I am. So like many of you, I was studying in the UK back in the early 90s, where I think probably many of y'all were either toddlers or thereabouts. And so yeah, I was at the LSE in London, did my accounting and finance, spent 3 very good years in London. Then, I joined Accenture at that time. It was also a kind of a career fair moment, met them in London, joined them at that point, came back, then worked there for close to 10 years. And then I joined CIMB, and that was, again, a very interesting switch, and certainly a very fulfilling, close to now, 15, 16 years in CIMB. So I started off with the strategy team, heading one of the teams there, strategy and innovation, where we did some of the initial growth strategies for CIMB, working on entry into new markets, some of the M&A, as well as the overall corporate strategies for the bank. Then in 2011, pivoted to do more investments, while still maintaining some of the strategy roles, but went on to drive some of the private equity work in CIMB, which involved streamlining some of our funds, making investments in new for the existing for the funds that we were still actively managing, as well as creating new funds. Then in 2014, I then became the Chief Strategy Officer, so sort of went back to core strategy, and then for 4 years ran that. And then in 2018, the role evolved to become the Chief Strategy and Design Officer, which then included a bunch of other functions and responsibilities, including customer experience, branding, setting up our digital factory, as well as setting up and driving sustainability at that point. Then came 2020, so this is probably the biggest sort of shift in my CIMB career. So then I became Chief People Officer, running the HR team, and getting involved in all this fun stuff that we're doing today, for example. And then also sustainability came back under my purview in the middle of last year. So today I drive those 2 portfolios for CIMB. Next. So, I thought, what could be useful for all of you listening to presentations maybe, can come across quite dry. And so, maybe I thought, some of the key sort of pointers that may be useful for you to take away from this, in terms of how you look at your future career. What are some of the core things that you need to keep at the back of your mind, right? So I always say, when you start a new job, or especially when you start your career, be like a sponge, right? Soak as much knowledge and experience. You might be surprised that even the most mundane thing that at that point you think is really mundane and, oh my God, why am I doing this? Later may come in handy in your job down the line. You would learn something from most responsibilities or most roles. You will pick up something. So work on that sort of mindset, if you like, that you are a sponge that is soaking knowledge, right? So that's, I think, an important thing. The second one, I always use this. Sometimes my colleagues in CIMB say I overuse it. I always talk about being able to connect the dots, focus on understanding, how things are interrelated and how what you are doing impacts, the success of your team, your division, your company. How does it even make a difference to our customers' lives? Really think about, what you are doing vis-a-vis, all the different objectives and factors that drive, why businesses and why companies are doing whatever they're doing. The third point is, you will go through obviously different junctures and phases in your career. So, look to build mentors or to have mentors. They don't have to be formal mentors, informal ones, maybe seniors in your company that you end up working in, who can give you very valuable input at critical junctures of your career. I benefited from that when I was in my earlier parts of my career. And I think if I look back, I wouldn't say that there's any decision that I made in my career that I would regret. And that's partly because, I was able to talk to people, to get points of views before making decisions. And then the final point is, avoid the temptation of the grass is greener on the other side. You can, of course, many people go on to have great successes when they move from one company to another. But I think, you don't always need that to pivot. You don't always need that to continue to learn and grow yourself. With the right sort of commitment you make and the right organization commitment, you can grow yourself and grow your career without necessarily leaving, your employer at any point in time. Okay, next. Yeah, so, in sort of getting to the closure of this, be agile in adapting your style of working to fit, the environment and the demands that are required. Embrace the integration of technology. I think that is a very strong sort of mantra at the moment. Have a mindset of, continuous learning and development. As I said, many things that you learn in university, unfortunately, may not be very applicable when you join the workforce, right? And so, a lot of, learning, if you like, will happen on the job, and your learning will certainly not stop when you finished your undergraduate or your graduate studies. Okay, next, do we have anything else? Yeah, so that's the end of my session. I think at this stage, I will pause and be guided on questions or anything that may come.
Yeah, thank you, Gurdeep, for such amazing, precious, valuable insights on we covered from how CIMB is currently coping with the changing circumstances that we're having in the current situation that we're facing due to COVID-19. We covered on how IR14 is happening and how CIMB is actually dealing with it, like trying to change, doing changes to cope with it and like succeed in striving in the current corporate world. Yoli also covered on how what are the infos that you need in order to get into CIMB, and as well as his own personal story and experience in corporate world for all of our audience here today in a succeed in corporate world in the future. And personally, as a BSc Accounting and Finance student from LSE as well, it's my greatest honor to be able to be here today talking today. So I think we can move into the first question. 2 years or more into the pandemic, we've moved from phases of lockdowns after lockdown to now when the restrictions are getting lesser and lesser, and finally we're going for Malaysia, the international border is opening up 1st of April. There's this question coming up from one of our audience asking, what has CIMB done to adapt to the world post-pandemic? I guess her question is asking about what is CIMB's plan on like dealing to the condition post-pandemic, like what the strategies CIMB are planning to do for it. I'll direct this question to Gudit.
No, sure. So I think there is many different areas that when we talk about response to the pandemic, right? So one area is just a very fundamental, what I call the way we work day to day, right? Meaning, I think very, very commonly talked about these days, do we need to work in the office like we used to? Do we work from home? What is the right balance? So that is one area. Two is really the business itself, right? So what is changing in the business and what are we going to do differently? So I think maybe I'll just say three things, right, that CIMB is sort of addressing in connection to the world beyond the pandemic or post-pandemic. So one is on working itself. We are certainly, being one of those in the world, that you would have read and seen in the world, where we are embracing a more flexible work model, right? So we call it the hybrid work arrangement. So everyone in the bank will be defined as a flex or non-flex employee based on their work or the function. And then if you're flex, then you have greater flexibility in terms of how to balance working from home, working from office, and what permutation. The second response is in the area of business priorities. And I think one thing that it's taught us is, we always knew digital was the way of the future, right? So even if you look at our transaction volumes, over the last pre-pandemic, you can see transaction volumes dropping in the branches and increasing on the web and the mobile app, right? But I think what the pandemic has shown us is that pace of change is ramping up, right? So from a business strategy, it also tells us that we need to continue to reconfigure our mix so that we align with that, right? Meaning importance on the digital platforms. And the third is, of course, sustainability, which is the other hat that I wear, right? And so here, I think what the pandemic has told us, and also we have gone through, is, look, at the end of the day, we can make a difference, right? As a large corporate, as a large financier. So doing the right thing has been put in the spotlight, if you like, right? So whether it was things like providing loan moratoriums to customers, whether it's in the form of helping our employees who were affected by the pandemic. So it just tells us and is reaffirmed that we have to take this responsibility role more seriously, right? And so I think these are probably the three things that I would say we are putting at the center of, responding to the pandemic.
Thank you, Gudit, for the valuable insights. I think the answer just now also covered one of the questions that another audience have asked, which is regarding the future outlook and trends of digitalization among finance industry. So a follow-up question on that, Trida, one of the audience, brought up this question about asking about how far along is Malaysia in the process of digitalization companies to other countries? Does Gudif have any insights on this?
Yeah, no, of course. I would say that generally we are doing quite a lot, right? So I think reasonably progress. But you see, I think what we can break down the point on digitization to two things, right? One is automating or digitizing processes and channels so that people can do more things on the web or on the app, etc. But the other aspect is changing business models altogether because of digitization, right? So I think the disruption driven by digitization in terms of business models, I think Malaysia is still slightly earlier in the game, as in still early days compared to places like China and places in the West, right? So that is probably my 2 cents on this, on that question of where we are.
Thank you, Gudif, for the insights. Just now during the presentation, there is one slide where you talked about how CIMB is CIMB focus its market in ASEAN. So there's this one audience about question asking about, she find it interesting that CIMB is a very ASEAN-based company rather than a Malaysian company. How strong is CIMB's presence in other ASEAN countries, and does CIMB's business differ in different countries? So maybe Gudif would like to explain more about this.
Sure. No, so definitely we are probably the most ASEAN bank in that sense, given the footprint we have. But if you look at it from the numbers, Malaysia is still 60% of CIMB, right? So if you measure CIMB's revenue or profits, of course it varies a little bit year on year, but generally speaking, Malaysia is 60% of CIMB. The next biggest market is Indonesia at close to 25-ish percent, 25 maybe growing to 30 eventually. So that is the second biggest market. And then Thailand and Singapore are very similar in that sense. They make up today maybe about 7-ish percent each of CIMB. And then of course we have Cambodia, which is smaller. So these 5 markets by and large generate almost the full sort of profits and revenue for CIMB. So what is the difference in some of these markets? So as you can imagine, in Indonesia, we are a big player, right? In Indonesia, we are the 5th largest bank locally. So that is very, very meaningful in a market like Indonesia, which is obviously the largest banking market or the largest economy in ASEAN. And so that's that. So there we are fairly big. We have the full suite of offerings. Then you go to for example in Indonesia we have 300 odd branches in terms of retail presence. And you go to Thailand, the presence there is smaller. So in Thailand, our presence is about 60-70 branches. So we are the 8th or 9th largest bank, so it's smaller. And then come to Singapore. Singapore is obviously a small country in that sense in terms of physical space. And so there we have one single branch, but we're doing a lot more digitally in Singapore. So and then finally in Cambodia is interesting. We started that bank from scratch, right? We opened the first branch in 2010, and today we have 20 odd branches and doing very well. And so that is Cambodia. And then finally, in Vietnam and Philippines, we also have a presence there in a very focused digital manner, right? So in Philippines, we've been voted the best new digital bank, and we've only opened a shop in Philippines about 2 years ago. So certainly that is encouraging and gives you all a feel of the spread across ASEAN. Yeah.
Thank you, Gudif, for the insightful answer. It definitely allows us to understand more about how CIMB's branches throughout ASEAN itself, having around although just having around 60% of its business in Malaysia, but it still have around 40% of influence around the rest of ASEAN, as well as having different business models in different countries.
Yeah.
Next question up. One of our audience we would like to know more about CIMB strategy on the current changes in minimum wage in Malaysia. As we all know, minimum wage in Malaysia has just been increased. So this audience would like to hear your thoughts on how the recent increase in minimum wage in Malaysia will impact companies like CIMB. So Gurdeep, would you like to address this?
Yeah, no, sure. No, so I think, directionally, of course, it's the right thing to do, to get the standard of living up or increase. And for us, business-wise, there's no negative issue, right? I think the question is how quickly will the minimum wage translate or cascade down? As we know, a lot of this minimum wage actually touches our foreign labor as well, right? The foreign labor in Malaysia, it's not just the Malaysians, but generally is moving in the right direction, right? And so I think businesses will not, my read is businesses will not get too drastically impacted. Of course, in the short term, some sectors will feel a bit of the pressure if the jump is straight away. But long and short, we don't have a concern that economic activity will suffer because of that.
Good for the precious answer. We've been talking about how CIMB facing changes and doing changes. Are facing challenges and using changes to overcome it. So one of the audience brought up this interesting question, asking about what are the challenges in adapting or undergoing transformation in large organizations.
I think yeah. So I mean that's
one or two to share about this.
Yeah, that's something that I've been involved in over a long period of time. So transformation essentially means change, right? And change firstly requires effort, and then sometimes has inertia because people are very used to doing things in a certain way and feel that. But the biggest challenge really is people, right? So transformation at the end of the day comes down to getting people to see the benefit of it and embrace it and essentially want to change. And as we know, we operate, in very diverse environments, right? So some people are more hesitant to change for various reasons. And so I think that probably is one challenge. And two is a little bit of what I call the core sort of nitty-gritty parts on the way we do it, the way we do it in terms of do we embrace the agile way where we impose or we introduce change bit by bit, as opposed to quite often some of these transformation initiatives can take a long time, right? So people wait like 18 months for a new whatever capability, a new system or something like that to come out. And by then, the world has changed after 18 months. And so then, people get frustrated and say, oh, we invested so much of time to do this change. But in the end, the change is not that, if you like, exciting because the world has changed or gone beyond that, right? So I think these are probably the two things in transformation that can be a bit frustrating.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty sure change requires a lot of effort and a lot of time. Follow on that, Gurdeep, you mentioned about how agile methodology is one of the way to carry out change essentially. So one of our audience would like to ask more about on some example on how CIMB adopt agile methodology while implementing changes and transformation, most likely.
Yeah, so this is something that we started to look at about 3 years ago. So long and short is today we are adopting it in a variety of places or ways, right? So for certain parts of our technology platform, we still operate what we call, for the more techie folks around you, the more waterfall methodology, which is the more sort of traditional pre-agile methodology. And then for certain areas like what we did 3 years ago when I mentioned the digital factory, something called the transforming customer journey team, we set that up and worked on that on the agile mode, right? And so that we've been doing the agile way. So essentially, what that entails is, we pick an area of business, whether it is, SME loans or something else, and then we redesign that entire customer journey from scratch, almost thinking like, we're starting a bank from scratch, right? So if you were going to start a bank from scratch, how would you design this journey or this whole process, and then put the right technology and tools in there to support that new journey or that process.
Thank you really for the insightful answer. I think you just mentioned about how, so essentially agile approach is how you throw away whatever happened in the past. So you design a whole new plan, whole new strategy out from scratch to overcome this new problem that you face, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, no, agile is the simple concept of agile is that you iterate, right? You build something and then you continue to iterate. So that's the crux of it. And so what we're saying is that when you want to build something, you may not have the answers, the full answers from day one, right? So I think if you talk to people who set up Spotify, for example, or many of these new businesses and apps, maybe not so new anymore, but things like Spotify, like from the first version that they built to the version that today is live, there's a lot of different improvements, right? So I think that the point here is that the way they are set up internally is using the agile methodology, which means they build something, they roll it out, then they constantly iterate and evolve and improve, right? So every few weeks there's a new version of Spotify, right? Or actually that is the case now with most apps, right? Every X number of weeks or months, you get an update, right? So in order to do that, they are all operating generally on the agile methodology. So I think for large companies and banks, that was not the way we were built back, for many, many years ago, right? So when we look at agile, we have to think about how do we adapt it, because I think the benefits are clear, right? But it's again whether, given we've got so much of existing systems and areas, that how do you do that? So what we did was we just said, okay, let's take one area and then we build that kind of from scratch, and we did it that way.
Thank you, Gudin, for the very constructive answer. Talking about agility, so I'm pretty sure agility is also one of the characteristics that CIMB would like to seek in their future employees. So one of the participants brought out a question about, are there any particular skills or experiences that would most likely increase one's employability opportunity with CIMB? Would you like to address it?
The skills that,
so
what again?
I think the audience is asking about the skills and experiences that one might need to possess in order to increase its opportunity to be able to be working with CIMB.
Okay. No, so like I said, don't worry too much about what you're learning in university, because I always joke and I said, I think if I look back at my university time and the first job I took when I came back, did I apply much of what I learned in uni from a content perspective, right? Like, the economic lectures you go to, the accounting courses you go to, whatever, chances are you are not going to apply that very much when you join. But so in that sense, to enhance your employability, I think the hard skills for some jobs is very relevant, right? So, say for example, if you are in the technical track, right, you're studying some form of computer science and all of that, then obviously having the right hands-on experience in project work and all of that in areas that in demand from companies, right? So for us, the technology area is the whole value chain, right? Whether you're front-end programmers, so are you using the latest languages and all of that, or are you exposed to like I said, the discipline on agile development, or all the way you talk about network and infra, are you exposed? So those technical skills are fine, and I think those are important ones. So in the technical space, being exposed to all of this will come in handy. I think on what I call the more business track or banking track, I think the main thing is going to be that proactiveness. I think it comes down to that, because I always say that I'm sure all of you are smart people, right? You all are in university, you've done quite well, you will graduate, and I'm sure you would, you have the prerequisites of being intelligent, right? So what's going to differentiate you from others is really the effort, So if you think about the formula for success, I always say is IQ plus EQ plus effort, right? That's the formula. So for some jobs, IQ is maybe, 40%. For some jobs, maybe IQ is only 20%. EQ is important and effort is the most important. So that, to me, is probably the advice. Yeah.
Thank you, Gurdeep, for the answer. I think we are running short of time. Maybe just one last short question. Do you have some short advices that you would like to give to our audience today on the floor on how they may want to succeed in their future career?
No, I kind of just finished that point with my last message. No, so I think, at the end of it, soak up as much as you can in your university days. When I say soak up, I mean not just the technical side of knowledge built up. It's a network that you build, the exposure to the surroundings. So, I mean, if you guys are in London or any city in the UK or Dublin or wherever you may be, there's so much happening around you, right? You look at what's happening to banking, you look at what's happening to businesses, trends. I would say pick up on that, right? Because one thing that you bring to the table when you come back is that direct exposure that maybe your colleagues and friends in maybe Malaysia may not have, that what I call hands-on exposure, right? So do that, build your international networks, your classmates, your friends, build that because that will come in handy down the line. And of course, come back to Malaysia.
Thank you, Gurdeep, on the last point. I think we'll wrap up at this point. Thank you very much for all the points given. I'm pretty sure all audiences today have benefited a lot from your insightful answers and thoughts. From UKC, CIMB is always CIMB has always given us strong support, and in the past few years, and we really appreciate it a lot. From my side, I'm really honored to be able to moderate this session today. So I'll hand over back to MC Eileen.
Thank you, Chien, and thank you, Mr. Gurdeep, for the wonderful sharing session. This marks the end of our session today. But remember to tune in. Our next session will be with Axiata, British American Tobacco, and Top Glove to speak about acquiring and retaining young talent at 6:30 p.m. Malaysian time or 11:30 a.m. UK time. See you. Thank you.